At dawn, she built the fence alone, until a rancher rode in with timber. The sky was only beginning to soften from night to morning when Clara stepped into the cold pasture, her breath forming small clouds in the air. Dawn crept slowly across the plains, painting the horizon in pale gold and blue. Frost clung to the ground, and thin patches of snow rested stubbornly along the fence line like memories that refused to melt. Clara pulled on her worn leather gloves and stared at the broken fence post ahead of her. It leaned crookedly, splintered from a winter storm that had howled through the valley days earlier. The fence wasn't just wood and wire, it was a boundary, a promise, a reminder that this land was still hers, even if everything else had been taken. She had learned not to wait for help. Ever since her husband passed 2 winters ago, the ranch had grown quieter. Too quiet. The mornings used to begin with shared coffee, shared plans, shared laughter. Now they began with silence and the sound of work that never seemed to end. People in town had offered help at first, but Clara politely declined. She didn't want pity. She wanted dignity. So at dawn, she worked alone. She lifted a hammer from her tool belt and tested the weight of it, then reached for a wooden post she had dragged from the shed herself. It was heavy, rough against her gloves, but she welcomed the strain. Pain reminded her she was still capable. As she struggled to set the post straight, she didn't notice the distant sound of hooves at first. A rancher rode slowly along the fence line, his horse calm and steady beneath him. He wore a dark coat, worn from years of honest labor, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes. Bundled across the back of his saddle was fresh timber, clean, solid boards cut recently. He noticed Clara before she noticed him. She stood alone in the cold morning, shoulders tense, jaw set in quiet determination. There was something about the way she worked, without complaint, without pause, that made him pull gently on the reins. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Mornin'," he said, his voice calm, unassuming. Clara startled slightly and turned, instinctively tightening her grip on the hammer. Then she relaxed when she saw him, just a rancher, not a threat. Still, she nodded rather than smiled. "Morning," she replied. He glanced at the leaning post, the uneven fence, the frostbitten ground. Then he looked back at her, eyes kind but not intrusive. "That fence take a beating," he said. "It did," Clara answered simply. The rancher hesitated, then dismounted smoothly. He lifted the timber from his horse and set it gently on the ground. "I've got extra wood," he said. "Cut it yesterday. Thought it might come in handy." Clara's first instinct was to refuse. It always was. But something about his tone, no pity, no assumptions, stopped her. She studied him for a moment. He didn't look at her like she was fragile. He looked at the fence, the land, the work. Like he understood. "I was managing," she said quietly. "I can see that," he replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "Doesn't mean you have to manage alone." The words settled between them like the rising sun, gentle, warming. Clara exhaled slowly. "All right," she said at last. "You can help." They worked side by side without rushing. He held the post steady while she hammered, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. When the wind cut sharply across the field, he positioned himself to block it without making a show of it. When her gloves slipped, he waited patiently until she adjusted them herself. They spoke little, but when they did, it mattered. He told her his name was Eli. He lived a few miles west, ran cattle with his brother. She told him about the storm, about the fence, about how winter always seemed harder than she remembered. She didn't tell him about her husband. Not yet. When they finished the first section of the fence, Clara stepped back, inspecting their work. It stood firm, straight against the open land. "Thank you," she said softly. Eli nodded. "Anytime." But instead of leaving, he picked up another board. "There's more fence down the line," he said, almost casually. Clara hesitated again. Then she nodded. They worked until the sun climbed higher, warming the earth and loosening the frost. Snow melted into shallow streams that soaked into the soil. Birds began to call from distant trees. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt something she hadn't expected. Not relief. Hope. When they reached the end of the broken section, Eli wiped his hands on his coat and glanced at the sky. "I should head back," he said. Clara felt a strange tug of disappointment but masked it well. "Thank you for the timber," she said. "And the help." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle, wildflowers, modest and imperfect, gathered from where the snow had already receded. "I picked these along the way," he said, holding them out. "Figured they belonged here." Clara accepted them, surprised by the warmth in her chest. "They're beautiful." "So is a fence that stands," he replied with a faint smile. He mounted his horse and tipped his hat. "If you need help again." She nodded. "I'll know where to find you." As he rode away, Clara stood by the fence, flowers in hand, the morning sun illuminating the land around her. The fence no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a beginning. She realized then that strength didn't mean refusing help. Sometimes, it meant allowing kindness to meet you halfway. And as the day fully arrived, Clara returned to her work, not alone, not afraid, but open to the quiet possibility that dawns could still bring unexpected grace.